Hi folks, Dr. Paul here with a video summary for Unit 5. And in this unit we were talking about substance use and the family context. And it's important that you know that there are a few different ways of understanding substance use from a family therapy perspective. There's the family support approach. And this is kind of a mainstream approach, in which case the person with the problem, the abuser or the alcoholic, for example, they're the ones with the problem, so it's an individual pathology from this perspective. But the family gets involved in treatment or is enlisted in treatment because the impact of the addict's behavior affects the family, and there's ways that family dynamics are disrupted by the addict's use. And that's one perspective of looking at family participation. Again, that's kind of a mainstream mental health individual pathology approach where the family is sort of a bystander. The other perspective is the underlying dysfunction theory. So substance abuse is a symptom like any other symptom, and you can look at more fundamental, if you will, or underlying reasons for the substance abusing behavior. And so we typically look for those other reasons in the family dynamics and the relational context. And this is a very big leap from the individual pathology perspective, because it is saying that there are other dynamics going on and that the substance use is more symptomatic of those other underlying issues. The problem with that perspective is that we've really just moved the locus of pathology from the individual to the family. And that was some of the criticism that the early family therapists, the pioneers of family therapy, got, because they used to just sort of move that pathology. Instead of just pathologizing individuals, they moved to pathologizing the context. And it's a shift for sure, but it's still looking at pathology. The other perspective is the homeostatic mechanism perspective, so that substance use is a symptom like any other symptom, but it is serving a homeostatic function in relationships or in a family context. So from this perspective, it's not necessarily a pathology, but it's looked at as a system's way of organizing in such a way that the substance use is part of a cycle of interactions, and it's just one arc of a whole entire circle. Okay? And then finally, we've got the perspective that substance use is an opportunity for transformation, not only for individuals, but for family systems. And from this perspective, we're really looking at the symptom as if it is an opportunity rather than a problem. And this challenges the dominant discourse in our field that substance use is a pathology, but rather a doorway or an opening for people to look at their lives and ask some big questions. And certainly substance use is an opportunity to do that. And for us as therapists, it's an opportunity to not necessarily look at the substance use as a symptom to be extricated or removed, if you will, but a doorway to asking some bigger questions. And so you've got some varying perspectives about how to view substance use. And it's not like one perspective is right or wrong, but rather it's important to take a look at some of the various perspectives and see which one fits best for you as a clinician and how you will feel most comfortable operating when people present with substance issues. Another important topic that we discussed in the case example with Alan, Abby, and Lisa. So there was some really interesting responses this week, and I enjoyed reading them. And it brings to mind an important issue in therapy, which is, who is the customer? And the first thing we need to discern is, what is the customer? What do I mean when I say who is the customer? So there's the presenting client or the identified patient, sometimes referred to as the IP. This is the person or people that the system is reporting is the problem. From when I use the term customer, I mean something very different than who the system is concerned about, but it's who do I see as requesting change, The customer is typically the person most invested in change happening, whether it's with themselves or somebody else. Typically, the customer has the power and the authority to organize the therapy. So rarely are children or teenagers customers. So there's not one hard and fast definition of a customer, but again, it's different from a client or the presenting client or the identified patient in that a customer is most invested in change. Oftentimes they're the most vocal about wanting to see that change happen. And again, they're the ones usually with the most authority to organize the therapy. Sometimes the customer is in the room with you, somebody in the family, oftentimes a parent. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the customer is the court system or legal system, for example. So in this case, it was interesting because I read it as Lisa, the daughter, was saying that the parents needed to come in for therapy. And so one of the questions I would have is Lisa the customer? And to what extent are her parents customers for therapy? And that was left ambiguous. So it's very easy to rush in and to do therapy with people, but a really important point of reference and a way to orient to cases is to ask yourself, who is the customer? And I had that question in this case because Lisa was an adult child and she was invested in her parents coming in for therapy. But I wasn't sure to what degree the parents were invested. And if they were invested in coming in, what were they customers for? Were they customers for the same thing that Lisa was a customer for? Or possibly were they interested in change for the other person or change for themselves in some way that really wasn't outlined in the case study? Another issue I think that comes to mind when we talk about substance use and alcohol use in a family is the idea of, is the substance use a solution or is it a problem? In our typical mental health medical model perspective, alcohol use is a problem. And that's very deeply embedded within the psyche of our culture, and most of us are oriented toward thinking that way. But you can just as easily think of a symptom like substance use as a solution to a problem. And when you look at it from that perspective, you have a whole different world of possibilities that open up to you, not only as a clinician, but certainly the opportunities that you can open up to clients and families when you look at substance use or alcohol use as a solution, not necessarily a problem. And what is that solution pointing toward? What kind of reorganization for the system or for the individuals themselves? It was really interesting to see that in this case example, most of you were not just putting the pathology on Alan. There were some of you that were at times, but for many of you, you were attempting to look at the case from a more systemic or relational lens, and I think that's great. It's important to keep in mind that we do not learn to think systemically overnight. It's something that you really want to simmer with and take some time, and you've heard me say this, I think, before in this course, that thinking systemically doesn't typically come naturally for most of us. And it's something that over time we begin to see behaviors fitting together in such a way that the individual pathology tends to drop away. And we just see behaviors that are complementary to each other, that fit together in such a way that we don't necessarily have to land the pathology onto one person. So, okay, just respond that you were able to view this video, and why don't you also respond with one thing that you were sparked or one follow-up question that you might have about anything that I discussed here. Okay, see you soon.